On today's episode of the Ag Irrigation Collective, we're going to go over a center pivot winterizing checklist. Stick around. Hi, I'm Wes Schaefer, your host with the Ag Irrigation Collective. Sure do appreciate you stopping by today. Today's episode is going to be pretty short. It's something I have intentions for you to refer back to, possibly around every October, so you can go through and winterize your pivot. Irrigating machines, especially for those in the North Country, it might even be before October. But this is going to be a brief list. And as this video publishes, it may be late in the season for some. However, it's still going to be timely for others. So maybe save this as a saved video to watch later so you can refer back to this off into the future. But as we get into this checklist, you need to evaluate your pivot every fall, make sure it's ready for winter and another growing season. So you park it. It's similar to any other piece of equipment that you shut down for the year, similar to your tractor before you park it in the shed. The only disadvantage to a pivot is you don't get to park it in the shed. So one of the first things you need to take a look at is to do a system flush. If you have any water quality issues, any sand in your water, you want to be sure and flush out your system. And typically that requires taking off the end plug or the end cap clear out at the end of your machine and flushing the entire machine out. There's also on the end right at the last drive unit or the LRDU, there is a sand trap in those. You want to pull out that sand trap as you're flushing it to also flush out of the sand trap as well as clear out of the end of the overhang. And you also want to drain water from all your above ground pipes. And typically what that looks like is you'll take at all your low points on a pivot, typically there are drains, presumably at every drive unit or every tower, there is a drain. And even if you've noticed those working throughout the season and you've seen them draining, it's good to go out and take those drains apart, specifically the ones with the little rubber puck in them, flip the rubber puck upside down, put them back together, and then it'll be ready for the next season as well. Because those little rubber pucks kind of get a little memory to them, and they kind of get a little concave to them. So flip them over, and they'll drain and keep drained out. Sometimes they get clogged up with some sand or some sediment that you'll want to clean that out as well. So there's that portion of it. You want to take a look at your panel boxes. You check for any loose or damaged connections. Loose electrical connections cause heat, and heat is never a good thing when you're dealing with electrical. So check for your loose electrical connections. If it was bad enough, you would have found it during the season, but if not, take a look at your panel boxes. You want to seal up any openings that were created throughout the season to avoid any type of rodent or bug damage, any bugs getting in there. Small birds can even find some holes and create nests in your panel boxes. Mice, all sorts of things can get up into your boxes. You also, at the pivot point, you want to check for a grounding connection and a grounding rod. There are several times that I've gone on pivots that there used to be a ground rod there. There's a ground wire hanging there, but the ground rod is missing for some reason. So check that while you're wandering around your pivot on each machine, just to double check and make sure you've got all your proper grounding rods and grounding. You also want to take a look at the structure of the machine. You could check your sprinkler chart for proper sprinkler placement. Typically, if you were throughout the season and you had lost a nozzle some way or somehow, now's a good time to go replace those so you're not monkeying with it in the springtime. You do want to check for worn and broken components, sprinklers, regulators. Now might be a good time to even replace your sprinkler package, or at absolute minimum, kind of check on those pressure regulators and see how they're looking. You want to replace your sprinkler package components between 7,000 and 10,000 hours of use is typically the recommended within the industry. Pressure regulators are the first part to wear out, and typically also your nozzles will wear out over time specifically with higher sediment water, more sandy type of water, you'll get some of those plastic nozzles wearing out. You want to check all your boots at the drive units, all your gaskets, and anything for leaks. And as you're flushing it, that's a good opportunity to do that as well, that it will afford you a good opportunity to look for those visible leaks. And as I said earlier, during the season, if it was a bad enough leak, presumably you would have repaired that. But if it was on your list of things to do later, well, it's now later. So let's get that done so you're ready for the spring. Because inevitably you'll get started up in the spring and it's busy. You get into March, April time frame, sometimes May, depending on where you're at, and you're not going to have time to repair that stuff. So do it now. And you want to check from span to span your grounding connection between each span. So typically there is a wire that connects each span that'll cause ground on the whole machine. So you want to make sure those grounding are in place. Another thing is your drivetrain you want to take a look at is you want to drain your water from your gearboxes. And typically how you do that is you'll get under and undo that drain plug, not all the way, just unthread it till you start seeing water coming around the threads. And the minute you start seeing oil, you can cinch that baby back up, and that will have gotten the water out of your gearboxes. And typically on most wheel gearboxes, you would want to see the oil about halfway up the worm gear is where it's desirable when you take a look at the level, and you check your level in your center drive gearbox as well. And as you're in and around the gearboxes, not only for the center drive, but also the wheel gear, you want to check for any leaks on your seals. Some of them can get some dirt up in them and start leaking. And one telltale sign on the wheel gear specifically is you'll have that whole ring of oil on the inside of the wheel there, and that's a pretty good sign that you're leaking. You want to check all of your U-joints for wear and make sure all your shields are in place. Those shields are important for a couple of things. For example, if you're growing really any crop that's as tall or taller than the drive base beam, where the drive line is, that crop can get wrapped up in that drive line, as well as if you're out there working on it while it's in motion, you could get wrapped around the drive line. So you want to keep all of your shields in place. Now's a good time to check tire pressure. It probably would be beneficial to also check that off into the spring. And on another episode, we did go over flotation and wheel rutting, and we also talked about some tire pressure in that. But you want to check your tire pressure. Keep in mind to not go below the minimum recommended for the manufacturer of that tire. And then, of course, you don't want to go over the maximum, but typically guys will run their tire pressure as low as possible. And the answer there is to check the minimum pressure recommended by the manufacturer and maybe run that pressure in them. Now's a good time to fill your wheel tracks, whether you do it with a closing device or you go and put actually additional material into those. But if you fill them now, they can firm up over the winter and have time. You may even choose to run your pivot around them a couple of times to pack them in a little bit when it's not muddy in the field. One thing also to keep in mind is the position and location where you park your pivot. You want it to be parallel to prevailing winds. You do not want it to be broadside to those winds. That can raise higher your chances of having that pivot be blown over in the wind over the winter time. And so it is best if you park that parallel to the prevailing winds. If you have a canyon or winds typically come out of, let's call it the north, park that either facing to the north or to the south. Face it into the wind or away from the wind, not broadside to the wind. It's best to park on level surface when possible, and then it's a better chance of it being just parked in a good spot. So you do, if possible, lock and secure your system. You don't want to have anybody turning your system on during the off season. I know there's several power companies though that come and pull power, so that may not be as much of an issue to some of you, but others, there can be some of the kids around the neighborhood or whatever that want to come around and monkey on pivots, and they can get turning them on. And if you've got something out in that field or whatever the case, you don't want your machine running around and getting into it. I've also seen an instance where, not necessarily with the machine in motion, but there were cattle grazing in the field. I think it was in December or January, and maybe they were even feeding alfalfa in that field. And the cows got over, and some way, somehow, were nosing up on the valve and turned the water valve on. And I think it was actually right by the water trough for the cattle, and turned on the water to the pivot and charged the pivot with water, and that whole machine froze up, and it it got icy, and I actually think it took a couple of the spans down. It got so much heavy ice on it that it took the last couple of spans down. So keep an eye on stuff like that. Now's a good time also around your pivot point to clean up any vegetation around the pivot point and your pipe as it goes into the ground, and any well connections that you have there. It's a lot easier working around in the springtime, and also to keep it sprayed and keep your vegetation down around your pivot point and your well location. And also by doing that, it makes it less inviting to rodents to come and habitat in that area there. So next consideration is your chemigation pumps. You want to take a look at all of your pumping stations, all of where your chemigation pumps are, drain and clean all of those. A lot of them are small enough you can throw them on the Honda, take them back over to the shop, and put them in the shop or in the shed for the wintertime, get them out of the weather. Another consideration is protect your system from your cattle and sheep. A lot of the small 1/4 and 1/8 inch hoses, cords hanging from your pivot panels. I know sheep and calves in particular love chewing on that type of stuff. So make sure you have panels around your pivot points, and you've got some protection around all of your valves and all of your inner workings to keep your livestock off of it. And then another thing too, probably the last thing, is just take note of any problems that you did count during the growing season and plan how to address them before the next irrigation season. Now's a good time to get with your local irrigation dealer to maybe order a fall order of parts. You may choose to put them on now, but you also may hold them over the winter and be ready for the next season, so you can be ready to rock and roll and not have any downtime, or at least make your best effort to not have any downtime or very little downtime by getting your irrigation parts ordered now and be prepared for off into the next season. So that was just a brief checklist there. I hope it can be helpful to some of you. If you feel like I missed anything, maybe comment down below and let me know what I missed and maybe what I need to cover a little more in detail next time. I sure appreciate you stopping by today. We'll catch you on down the road. Be profitable.